Welcome to Level Up Your Writing, presented by the Warminster Township Free Library. In this series, we've talked a lot so far about characters. Now we're going to move on to another crucial element of storytelling, and that is world building. The world you place your characters and plot in can have a large impact on the story as a whole. Whether it's our own world, a made-up world, or somewhere in between, world building has the ability to immerse your reader in the story and make them feel like they are there with the characters. Good world building can also help you convey the tone or mood of a scene as well as the broader themes of the story. World building doesn't just apply to creating new worlds or adding imaginary elements to our real world. Realistic fiction also relies on world building. You're just building a representation of our own world instead of a completely made up one. The same principles will apply in both cases, but for the purposes of this video, I'll mostly be talking about some of the thought processes behind creating a new world. And this video will be more of a general introduction, while future videos on this topic may be more specific. Just like when you create a character, your world building will be better if you develop it beyond just the basic surface level details. If you want truly vivid world building that feels real, putting some thought into how the different aspects of this world came to exist and how you can convey those different aspects of the world can help you immensely in this goal. World building is as broad a topic as you can imagine it to be. You could world build endlessly, to an effectively infinite degree. For an example of what I mean, one exercise to help you see how deep you can go with world building is to act like a toddler. And by that I mean ask why, a lot and repeatedly. For example, let's say your main character wears a purple shirt into a new town and gets a lot of strange looks from the residents. Some are wary and some are angry. Why? Because in the dominant culture of this town, the color purple is associated with negative things like dishonesty and even evil. Why? Because long ago their oppressors wore purple. Why? Because to those oppressors, purple was a sign of power, and wearing purple was a way to remind those under them of their place. Why? Because they had control of the fields of purple plants that gave them the dye, and hoarded it until purple dye became expensive and only those who served the oppressive monarch had access to it. Why? Because the monarch wanted a monopoly on the dye economy. Why? And so on and so forth. By doing this, you can see how attitudes, beliefs, and culture as a whole are intricately tied to the history of the world you're creating. All these elements coexist and feed off each other. Nothing exists in a vacuum, and no aspect of a world will spring from nothing. Asking yourself about the whys and hows can help you build a world that makes sense. Something might sound cool or interesting, but think about how it came to be so that you can justify its existence in the text. If there's a city on top of a mountain, why is it there? How did it get built? If the government banned something, why did they do it? And how did other people let it happen? If magic is supposed to be a secret, how is that secret kept? And why is it being kept? Think about the history of the world you're creating, because it will end up informing a lot of the smaller details. For example, the history of a place can impact the attitudes of the people that live there, and that in turn will affect the culture at large, and vice versa. Of course, this exercise also shows you just how far you can go by tracing the whys back to their sources. That means that knowing when to stop is a good skill to learn. It's easy to get lost in the fun of world building and figuring out every little detail. While this isn't inherently a bad thing, you may want to be careful that you don't end up world building too much. It's possible that you could accidentally box yourself in, not allowing yourself the freedom to make different choices if you find that you need to later in the story. It can be tricky to figure out what to do when you establish details that you later realize don't work or that contradict something else you wrote. You may feel like you either have to change the rules you established, or change other aspects, or even start over entirely. So rather than figuring out every minute detail before you start writing, you might find it helpful to leave some things a little vague. This will allow you to create new elements of your world as you write, as you need them. You may end up surprising yourself by realizing that some things you already established tie together in surprising ways. When it comes to world building's effects on your characters, there are a few things to keep in mind. Think about what culture they grew up in and how it shaped them. How do they interact with the world differently than a character from another culture? Keep in mind that not every person in a culture will hold the exact same beliefs. Even though they all live in the same culture, they will be shaped by it in different ways. If you want to diversify people within a single culture, ask yourself, what are the markers of someone who conforms? What are the markers of someone who doesn't? And where do your characters fall in between? Establishing rigid rules and customs and then breaking them is an excellent way to advance your plots and characters, as well as provide emotional stakes for everyone involved, including your reader. One example of world building that ties together a lot of what I've talked about in this video is the concept of demons in The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. If you don't know the story, the world this book takes place in is very similar to our own, except there's one major difference: demons. Demons are physical manifestations of a person's soul that takes the shape of animals with human intelligence. This one aspect of the world permeates everything else in the book, shaping the culture and customs, the history and religion, as well as the way characters interact with each other. The ripples that form from this one element of world building, which is introducing demons to a world that otherwise is similar to our own, is enough to create almost every aspect of the plot of the book, as well as all the differences between our world and the world of the main character, Lyra. It's also established early and often in this book that people don't touch each other's demons, and this fact is consistent throughout the whole book. This means that when someone does eventually grab Lyra's demon, the reader knows and feels just how wrong it is. If the author didn't make such a big deal of this one piece of world building, the character's reaction would not affect the reader as much. So you can see how one element of your world can end up going a long way when you start thinking of all the different layers of the world that thing affects, from a small scale, like how it affects individual characters, to a large scale, like how it affects the culture at large. Complex world building isn't always about the quantity of details, but the quality, and how you use them. Even if you come up with a lot of details as you brainstorm your new world, you don't have to include all of them explicitly. This week's writing exercise is similar to the one I mentioned earlier in the video. I want you to pick one aspect of a world you're building, or one from a series that you like, and then extrapolate it to all the subtle ways it influences things. What caused this world building detail to exist? And what does it cause? What ways are culture and behavior influenced by it? How do people use this detail to their advantage? Next video will also be related to world building, but a little bit more specific. We're going to be talking about using different settings in your story.